Your checkout page stopped serving customers this afternoon, and the service behind it answered every single call. Slowly, but it answered. You lost an hour of an evening you had promised to somebody else, plus a few £1,000s of orders, to a dependency that never actually died. Nobody tells you about this failure, and no dashboard sold today has a panel for it. So how does one tired neighbor take your whole product down with it? Your own traffic did it, with your help. The graph of your dependency looks tired. The graph of your service looks dead. Two very different pictures, one shared cause, and no panel anywhere draws the line between them. You have met this outage before under a different dependency, and you will meet it again in a month or two under a third. So which of your own settings turned tired into dead? Two numbers, mostly. A retry count and a timeout, said one afternoon by somebody who has since changed teams, and never revisited by anybody at all. Small numbers, large consequences. Your users pay for them in abandoned baskets and in the quiet decision to shop somewhere calmer. You pay in trust, which costs far more than capacity. Would a larger instance sell you any of that trust back? It would not, and here is the part that ought to bother you. You would think a client library that retries a failing call is helping you out. It does the exact opposite, and it writes a cheerful logline while it does. That one default has cost this industry more revenue than any exotic distributed systems paper has ever saved it, and it ships to you switched on. Hold that question about your own retry count, since a measurement settles it later on, and the number will probably annoy you. What you deserve over the coming quarter of an hour is arithmetic you can run against your own service this week, a small machine you can draw on a whiteboard from memory, and one honest account of where the famous cure lets you down. Note, none of this is rare or clever. The failure carries a name, a well-known cure, a shelf of writing behind it, and a chapter of the Site Reliability Engineering book that Google published in 2016. Competent teams still walk into it monthly. Seniority offers no protection at all, and the most confidently wrong retry policy I have ever read in review was written by somebody very good indeed. The cure is called a circuit breaker, and the name is borrowed from the box on your wall. Michael Nygaard put it in front of a generation of engineers in Release It, published in 2007, and the implementation most people have actually touched is Hystrix, which means the library the streaming team at Netflix wrote and later gave away. A breaker sits between your code and one dependency, watches the results going past, and refuses to forward any call once those results look bad enough. Where does the wall analogy stop being useful? Analogy, think of it as the breaker on your wall rather than the fuse in a very old plug. A fuse melts once and demands a visit from somebody holding a screwdriver. A breaker trips, waits, and gives itself one careful chance to try again, which is the whole reason your kitchen recovered from that kettle without a single tool involved. The waiting and the one careful chance are the entire design. Everything else, notice, is bookkeeping. The grand term for what a breaker prevents is a cascading failure, which is a lot of words for the outage whose blast radius grew far past its cause, because one database gets slow and 4 services that never spoke to that database start serving errors. Blast radius is the useful noun here, it means how much of your product a single fault manages to reach. Is yours as small as your architecture diagram implies? It is almost certainly larger, and the diagram is the reason you believe otherwise. Hystrix itself was retired in 2018, which means the idea comfortably outlived the library that made it famous. The same small machine is the thing you will find inside Poly, inside Alibaba Sentinel, and inside the proxies underneath Envoy and Istio. What that machine actually is, and what it quietly costs you, is where most explanations stop. Before the cure earns anything, the failure needs a shape you can compute. The unit here is your worker pool, and the term means a fixed set of reusable threads, where fixed is the word carrying all the weight. Say 200 of them. Each call out to the dependency holds one thread until an answer arrives or a timeout fires, which means 200 is your concurrency ceiling, and a hard one. What is the largest number of calls your own service can have in flight right now? Note, a pool is the least glamorous object in your architecture, because it is also the one that decides your worst afternoon. Nobody warns you about it. It appears in no diagram, it carries no logo, and it is the thing that actually runs out. So what becomes of a fixed pool when the service it calls slows down? It becomes a queue, and the first step is arithmetic. Your dependency normally answers in 20 milliseconds and you take 2,000 requests a second. Multiply those together and 40 threads are busy on average, out of 200. Comfortable, boring, healthy. The rule doing that work is Little's Law, published by John Little in 1961, and it says the average number of things in flight equals the arrival rate multiplied by how long each one takes. Then slow the dependency down. 20 milliseconds becomes 2 seconds, 100 times worse, and the same multiplication happily keeps working. 2000 a second at 2 seconds each asks for 4000 threads. You own 200. So where do the other 3800 requests a second go? They queue somewhere nobody designed, and every one of them holds something your other endpoints wanted. Your health check page, which touches no database, times out. That is the process by which a dependency problem became your problem. Before I tell you what your retry policy does to that picture, guess. 3 attempts per call, the default in more client libraries than you would like, against a dependency failing about half of everything it receives. Say the new arrival rate out loud, then read on. 6000 a second. 3 times your normal load, delivered at the exact moment your dependency holds the least capacity it has ever held, and your client library did it on your behalf as a feature it advertises, because that is what you configured. Retry amplification is the term, and the arithmetic stays brutally simple. Multiply your traffic by your attempt count. Double the attempts and you double the fire. So why does the second outage always arrive faster than the first one? Because your own multiplier was quietly applied a second time. Case in point, I called your service dead a moment ago, which is wrong, and measuring it step by step gives something stranger. It is working extremely hard, at full thread occupancy, producing answers for callers who gave up long ago. Your timeout is 10 seconds. Your queue wait is 40. So every answer your service produces arrives for somebody who hung up 30 seconds earlier, and your effective throughput is 0, because the work outlived the caller. Full utilization and zero output should not be the same state, and here they are the same state. A machine working flat out at nothing is the part of this I enjoy most, at least once it belongs to somebody else. Which raises the tricky part: what should a breaker count as a failure? Errors are the easy case. The dangerous case is a slow success, a call returning correctly at 4 seconds against a deadline of 1 second, because that call held a thread for 4 seconds and delivered nothing anybody waited for. Then count timeouts as failures, and count answers slower than your deadline as failures too, or your breaker sits closed and satisfied straight through the failure mode that hurts you most. A staff engineer pushed back on exactly this in review. We already use exponential backoff with jitter, he said, so surely the protection already exists? It fails to, and the difference is worth the argument, because backoff merely spaces out one client's attempts and leaves the aggregate arrival rate at the mercy of how many clients you happen to have. Mark Brooker at Amazon has written the clearest public account of why that politeness stops scaling once the crowd grows. Then a breaker removes the calls outright, which is rude, and being rude is the whole point. So, the mechanism, under the hood, in 3 steps. Closed, calls flow through and every result is counted. Open, calls are rejected instantly, without touching the dependency at all, for a fixed cooldown. Half open, exactly one call is allowed through as a probe, and then a success closes the breaker so traffic resumes, while a failure sends it straight back to open for another spell of cooldown. 3 states, 2 timers, 1 probe. Could you sketch that on a whiteboard from memory right now? You could, and that is the whole process. The trip condition is where everyone gets lost, because the missing piece is the denominator. Say you open the breaker above an error rate of 50%. One call arrives, that one call fails, and the rate reads 100%, so you have then cut a healthy dependency off from your whole product because of one unlucky request. Every serious implementation therefore carries a minimum volume, and 20 requests inside a rolling window of 10 seconds is a common shape. Does your own configuration name that minimum? A rate with no minimum sample count is superstition wearing a percentage sign. The cooldown is the second number, and here I will be plain with you, no principled way to choose it is known to me. 30 seconds is what most people ship, and I do not know why 30 rather than 10, because that figure is folklore passed between libraries rather than anything anybody derived. Too short, and you keep probing a dependency that is trying to restart, because a probe every second is only the original flood at a lower volume. Too long, and you serve rejections straight through a recovery you failed to notice. The probe is what rescues you from the second mistake, which is exactly why one call through and half open beats any timer standing alone. Caveat: a breaker that opens does not make your customer's answer appear. It converts a slow failure into a fast failure, and a fast failure is still a failure. Without something to serve instead, all you have bought is a tidier error page and a happier dependency. Hystrix was designed around that requirement rather than around the state machine. Every call Hystrix protected had to name its fallback, whether a cached result, a stale recommendation, a default shipping estimate, or one honest note that a section of the page is resting. The fallback is also where honesty gets awkward, and in practice a stale answer is wrong in a way your metrics cannot show you. Your product team may quietly prefer wrong and fast to correct and absent, and nobody will ask them which they wanted. So write that trade-off down somewhere a reviewer can see it, since a silent stale answer that nobody agreed to is a decision you made on behalf of the business while looking at a dashboard at 2 in the morning. Which of those two would your own customers choose? And isolation is where practitioners quietly give up, which is the limit nobody mentions. A breaker on one dependency cannot save you, and it will not even slow the bleed. When every dependency shares a single thread pool, the bleed arrives in the shared resource rather than in the call you protected. A bulkhead is the name for the fix, borrowed from the compartments in a ship's hull. Give each dependency its own pool, so saturation stays local to whatever caused it. Hystrix defaulted to a separate pool per dependency and paid real overhead for the privilege, and the overhead was the product rather than a flaw in it. Now the failures of the cure itself. A breaker flaps when your window is short and your traffic thin, opening and closing twice a minute, and the protection breaks down exactly when you needed it steady. Breakers across many instances also tend to synchronize, since every instance watched the same bad minute, so they all open together and all probe together, and your one careful probe will not stay careful, it becomes a small stampede. Add jitter to the cooldown, meaning a random spread on each instance's timer, and the herd disperses. A deliberately random timer beating a carefully chosen one is perverse, and it is the theme of this whole subject. A breaker cannot fix a capacity shortfall either. When your dependency is simply too small for the traffic you send it, opening a breaker sheds load for 30 seconds and hands the same problem straight back, and no state machine anywhere will buy you servers. Does it at least warn you about a slow burn? It hides one. A failure rate sitting politely below your threshold for weeks will never trip anything. Your users feel every one of those failures, and your breaker dashboard stays a calm and reassuring green throughout. Whether you can live with that depends on what your customers do the moment an answer arrives wrong. So how would you know whether any of this applies to you? Do not take my word for it, because one afternoon settles it. Take your dependency, force its latency up in a staging environment, and hold your traffic flat. Watch two numbers only, thread pool occupancy, and completed work that a caller was still waiting for. Now open a breaker by hand and watch the same two again. If the completed work recovers once you shed load, saturation was your failure mode and a breaker earns its complexity. If it stays flat, your constraint sits somewhere else entirely and a breaker will not move it, so you have just saved yourself a library, a dashboard, and a quarter of arguing about thresholds. A whiteboard cannot answer this. Only that afternoon can. Which brings us back to the two numbers you started with. Multiply your peak arrival rate by your worst dependency latency, compare the answer with your pool size, and multiply the whole thing by your retry count. When the result is larger than your pool, your outage is already scheduled and merely waiting for a slow afternoon to arrive. So the real question is not whether you need a breaker at all. Ask yourself which of your dependencies has no fallback worth serving, and what you would honestly put in front of a paying customer in its place. Answer that second one first and the state machine turns into a detail. Your call, and I would rather you made it on a Tuesday than at 2 in the morning.